Hello YouTube, this is Asatsu5. I don't know what order I'm going to upload these videos. I filmed one video with my GoPro and right now I'm using my phone because the GoPro is acting a little bit funny. I don't quite understand it because I didn't read the instructions. But me and my brother went to Houston to witness a Bible study, open Bible school. What's it called?
Open Bible Academy.
Open Bible Academy.
Graduation.
Which was a very good experience. In fact, I'm willing to say that this whole day was a good experience, depending on your definition of good. We went to Papados, and those are everywhere in Houston. And there was a funny story there. And we decided to go to the Galleria, which is probably the biggest mall in Texas that I know of. And we noticed some people there. And we recognized them right away that they were the black Hebrew Israelites, which I don't think they like that term, but to me it's the best way to describe them because they see themselves as the real true Israelites, the real Jews, and everybody else is just imitators. And they have a really weird theology, which I don't know if we'll get into all of it right now. This is just kind of the aftermath video. But basically, to break it down, they believe that black people who were taken to America in the North Atlantic slave trade are the real Jews, and that salvation is for them alone, and those different camps and stuff, and that list of ethnic groups like white people, I think Arabs and Chinese, are going to be their slaves or go to hell, depending on what's going on. And it's a race-based religion. And but it's also under the disguise of Judaism or sometimes Christianity. And so me and my brother were familiar with them, but we never actually met them. We've seen videos on them. We know they exist. And in fact, they were part of the reason that that Salmon kid got on CNN. And started that whole punchable kid thing, which CNN and all the media outlet people didn't put on their newsreel. I digress. We talked to them for a little bit. My brother, being a minister or a prison chaplain, threw his hat in the ring first, and they actually accosted us first. They held us down and said, "Hey, y'all believe in Jesus?" And of course we said, "Yes, we do." And then they engaged us in conversation. My brother went first, and my brother started quoting scripture that leads to the universal, well, I don't want to say that, but the universal blessing of Christ to the world. And he was quoting some other scriptures as well. And as soon as he started doing that, they turned the conversation to race and what color was Jesus really, and then they started name calling and doing some childish things. One guy did say the S word when someone said something. I can't remember which one of us said something and that guy said something, but they weren't like cursing us out or anything, but they were calling us names and being quite rude. And my brother, as gently as he can, was a little bit rude. He said, "You know, if you don't want to talk about scripture, then I really don't want to talk to you." So he walked off a little bit. And then I decided to stay a little bit, and they were still on the concept of what color was Jesus, and they said, "We're going to show you a passage that proves that Jesus was black." And I said, y'all going to Revelation? And they said, "Yeah, but we can go other places and prove it." I said, "No, go ahead, go to Revelation." And they started reading John's description of Jesus, which describes his hair being white as wool and his feet being like bronze. And I said, well, at this point, all you have is the color of his hair and someone that's tan. And so, and they pushed their position a good bit, and I talked to them a little bit about that. And the thing to remember, when you read Revelation and John's description of Jesus, he didn't initially recognize Jesus. And I think that's shown in his writing when he was describing Jesus, because anybody that John knew, any of the disciples or apostles, anybody who's ever seen Jesus in Israel would have known who Jesus looked like. Even a massively disfigured Jesus, they would have recognized him because he was publicly executed. So I think when John was describing him, it's because he had a different appearance. He was in his glory state. So I think that's important to remember that, yes, he had in this scripture, he had eyes of burning coal, and he had all the bronze, and the hair as white as wool. And remember, they said the hair white as wool, not hair textural wool. They weren't talking about wool being a texture. They were talking about wool, the color. And then there was also something in there about Jesus having hair as white as snow. And they questioned me, and they said, why did they describe his hair being two different whites in two different ways? And I said, poetry. Have you ever read Song of Songs? And they didn't like that. And so we had a good exchange, and they read this part in Lamentations that I wasn't familiar with. Keep in mind, I don't have the whole Bible memorized. Very few people do. Most people just pick it up and read it. And I said, hey, can I read that? And the guy said, no, I don't want you touching my Bible. And finally, this one guy, I wish I knew his name, and I wish I would have been a little bit more charitable of his kindness, because he was the kindest guy there. He allowed me to look at his Bible. And I'm extremely dyslexic. Y'all know that. And they were like, read. I said, excuse me, give me a little bit of time to read. I'm a little dyslexic. And one of them, the main guy, called me a caveman. And so I said, caveman? And I said, if y'all going to use ad hominems, then I'm not going to talk to you. And they said, well, you're Caucasian, aren't you? Or they said, well, what does Caucasian mean? I said, well, the Caucasian region comes from Russia, Mongolia, that area. Saudi Arabia is pretty close there. I said it's the Caucasus region of Russia, simplified. And they said, well, Caucasian means caves. There was a lot of caves there, and you are descended from cavemans and Neanderthals. I can't say that word. And I said, well, I think there's a lot of caves in Israel as well. And they weren't too happy with that. But the thing that I didn't bring up, and I wish I would have because I didn't think about it, I'm not Caucasian. Matthew's not Caucasian. We are actually Norman. And I know that's splitting hairs, but our lineage is from the Norths, Norwegian, that sailed in France and were probably the second group of Vikings to become Christian. And then we invaded England in 1066. We kicked butt and defeated the Anglo-Saxons. Well, not even Americans, or Anglo-Saxons. And I wish I would have brought that up, but my brother brought up a very good point. I was bringing up race and color, but my brother brought up scripture. Now, my brother might not be able to think as well while driving, because driving is an important task. But do you remember off the top of your head?
Yeah, so I brought up Genesis chapter 12, verses 1 through 3, which talks about the universal blessing to all the families of the world through the offspring of Abraham. And they acted as if they didn't even know this blessing. It's the first promise of God after the story of Scripture focuses on the whole cosmos through Genesis 1 through 11. And in Genesis 1 through 11, the word curse is going to come up 5 times. Well, guess what? If you look at Genesis chapter 12, verses 1 through 3, blessing is going to come up 5 times. So whatever is going on in Genesis chapter 12, it's going to undo the universal curse that was brought about by sin in Genesis 3 through 11. And they didn't even act like they knew that scripture. And when I started talking about how that is a universal promise to all the families of the world, which would include Israel, which would include all, means all there. And so they didn't have anything to say about that. And then finally, one young man, he asked me, well, how is the blessing obtained? And I said, well, Genesis chapter 15, verse 6 says that the promised blessing of Abraham, of righteousness, it's attained by faith. And of course, I didn't get into the New Testament with them because I thought the Old Testament would speak better to them. They're not going to really want to deal with the New Testament that much. But the thing is, if they have a screwed up view of the Old Testament, and that's what they're looking into, and they're not even looking at it all that well, I didn't really think it would be very wise to go to the New Testament. And but the thing is, when you bring up the real promises of God, interpreted as they should be, they simply don't want to talk. All they're going to do is they're going to just use insults. I think they wanted to assert that I was a pedophile, homosexual.
Yeah, they did.
And, I mean, it didn't even get an eyebrow raise out of me because I'm just like, well, that's, I mean, I minister to people like that all the time, but that's not, my particular sin. But, I brought up how I'm trusting in the offspring of David, who's the suffering servant who died for the people's sins, according to Isaiah 53. And again, they didn't want to touch it, they wanted to talk about slavery. And so I said, well, I haven't benefited. The only way I've benefited from slavery is the same way you have. And I was talking about both modern day slavery. They had on really expensive clothes and watches, more expensive watches and clothes than I had on. And but really, I was talking about I have received benefit from the suffering servant who was a slave to all, who died for the sins of the world and died for their sins as well, if they accept that by faith. But they did not want to listen to that. All they wanted to do was just call names. They didn't call me a caveman. Basically, by that point, I said, well, if you're not wanting to talk about Scripture, I don't really care to talk to you. And they just want to talk about race. And so, I said my piece. I proclaimed the promises of God, and they don't want anything to do with them. And so at that point, I just simply walked away.
Yeah. Let's reiterate that the main verse they go to is in Deuteronomy.
Yeah, so Deuteronomy 28 is going over the blessings and curses for Israel. And by the way, I do not believe that, African Americans, people that were brought over by the transatlantic slave trade, are the true Israelites. They would argue that, and they would say that they are experiencing the curses of Deuteronomy 28, which is talking about Israel. And the last verse, it's going to be like verse 64 or 66, talks about if they do not obey, all the curses of this book will come upon them, and God will send them back to Egypt, in which they were told never to return. They will offer themselves for sale, as in slavery, but no one will buy them. As we were walking out the Galleria, I wanted to ask them, what does this mean? And of course, they would have talked about, they would have spoken about the transatlantic slave trade, which that is not talking about, all right? But if you do recall, in the transatlantic slave trade, people did buy Africans. And so it just simply cannot be the transatlantic slave trade that Deuteronomy 28 is referring to. And I would have enjoyed, their version of that, but I'm sure, as with my first attempt, they wouldn't have even engaged that.
Yeah, it's sad. As I was walking off, I walked off a good distance because it can be very frustrating You know, these people are not the nicest people in the world. And as I was walking off, I said, well, God bless. I hope you enjoy the peace of Jesus someday. It's the only thing I could think of to say. And then they yelled at me, well, you're going to be my slave someday. And so
I think that really shows you the heart of what this is all about.
Yeah. But anyways, I wanted to share this little experience. If you want to learn more about the Black Hebrew Israelites, I would recommend Vocab Malone on YouTube, Instagram. I don't know if he has a Facebook. He has a book on the subject, which I think I've reviewed. And he's writing another book on the subject, I think. And I just wanted to share this experience. Personally, this day was a good day, even including our interaction with the Black Hebrew Israelites. Even though they were rude and they were frustrating, and we were frustrated, and you could say that we were angry, because, you know, it's not fun being yelled at. But it was a good experience to have, and I can't think of anybody other than my brother to have my first experience with Black Hebrew Israelites. It would have been nice to have some more friends, especially Vocab, but it was a good learning experience. These are people we haven't experienced in person, and I think we both grew from it, and it was an opportunity that needed to be answered. Even if they don't accept, maybe someone else who is listening will accept. Maybe we planted a seed. Maybe what we did was pre-evangelism, or you know, street apologetics. It was a worthwhile thing to do, even though it might not have been the most fun thing to do. So I wanted to tell that story, and I got another video about this day that's going to be hilarious, at least in our eyes. That's it. Satsu 5, Austin Culbertson, Matthew Culbertson. We're out.